Hi, I'm Daniel Nyman. On behalf of the Forum for Healthcare Strategists, as well as our colleagues at Heap and Cardinal Digital Marketing, welcome and thank you for joining us for Healthier Marketing Strategies, Driving Acquisition and Conversion with Data-Driven Marketing. In this timely webinar, we'll explore how healthcare marketers can leverage behavioral data to engage patients at each step of their journey, while managing data governance and maintaining HIPAA compliance. Before I turn the program over to our speakers, one quick note. Attendees are participating in listen-only mode, but you can still ask questions. If you have a question, please enter it into the question and answer pane located on the bottom of your screen at any time. We'll respond to as many questions as we can in the time we have. With that, I'll turn the program over to Aaron Brox, Director of Solution Engineering for Heap, to get us started. Aaron?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aaron Brox, the Director of Solution Consulting here at Heap for North America. I want to go through our agenda for today. Over the next hour, we're going to start with some welcome, some introductions. I'll be speaking a little bit about modern data analytics for healthcare based upon my experiences here at Heap with our customers. Before I turn over to Rich Briddock, who will be talking about HIPAA-compliant marketing strategies. And then we'll have a good conversation with Adam Graves from MSK about data-driven marketing and what that actually looks like from a day-to-day perspective. I want to try to make sure that we get this done with, as much as 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A time at the end. So as we go through, please feel free to drop questions into the chat, and we'll make sure that we'll have a chance to address them at the end. So our speakers for the day, Adam Graves is the Senior Director of Marketing, Measurement, Analytics, and Insights at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. He is somebody his role is to make sure that he is using data to drive better decisions on a day-to-day basis. Rich Briddock, the SVP of Strategy and Analytics at Cardinal Digital Marketing, will be really helping us to understand, given the shifting regulatory frameworks, what that means for digital marketing analytics. And as I said, my name's Aaron Brox. So to give you an idea as to what a director of solution engineering does, I work every day. I'm honored to work every day with organizations across North America to try to figure out often what their tech stack needs to be to support strategies and drive better data-driven decisions. So what does that really look like? And I'm lucky enough, I get to work with organizations of all different sizes from across North America, Canada, and the United States, and really hear a lot of the challenges that they have. And often when I'm speaking with healthcare organizations, I'm assessing and asking questions to really understand not only what are they trying to do today, but how are the things they're trying to do reflective of a certain level of data maturity? Most organizations who I have a chance to work with have been around for 10, 15, 20, 50, 80 years. And depending on how they've been dealing with, especially in the last 5 years or so, some pretty significant changes in how they work with their patients, with their members, with their employees, as we've shifted more and more to a digital landscape. Different groups have had different types of questions. I deal with groups who are just starting to figure out that tools that perhaps were originally designed to track ad spend are giving them some breadcrumbs. They understand conversion numbers. They know that based upon efforts to attract people to their site, patients are arriving and they're converting, usually at a particular percentage. I had one head of digital marketing who said, Aaron, I can see clearly that I have 18% of people who are hitting my page are clicking the button to start to book an appointment. So what I don't understand is, what are the other 82% doing? Are there people who are starting this process and who are not able to complete it? And this is a great starting question that most organizations in the last 5 to 10 years have started really digging into to understand. Where things become really interesting for me is as an organization is moving up that data maturity curve. And now they're at the point where they're saying, we now have some ideas. We're using manually tracking particular elements on our site. Maybe we're using the same applications and stretching what they can do, but there's always another question. And I like to say that data is hungry. It's ravenous, in fact. Any answer you get, if you're speaking to an organization that is curious, will start to engender new questions. And this is where people usually start looking at Heap. Just for those who don't know us, the big difference between Heap and most other tools on the market is that instead of manually tracking individual elements to try to get to your answers, and we can manually track, but that doesn't become the main strategy to get to a place where you have a data set that you can query. Heap instead will automatically track every click, every page view, every state change. We do it in a way that protects a customer's PII, and especially for organizations who are perhaps at the very tip of those who need us the most, those who have suddenly realized that due to regulatory changes, they've had to remove all analytics and are now facing a large digital landscape with no insight whatsoever, and perhaps a significant roadmap, instead of a significant effort to start to instrument these sites. Heap instead is giving them a clear path forward to make sure they can rapidly replace tools that maybe they've had to remove. So regardless of where you are on this curve, whether you are an organization who is just first starting to ask and answer questions, or you're one that has realized how hungry data is, or perhaps one that is in a bit of an analytics crisis, I hope that today's session will give you some ideas and some thoughts about how to really understand that experience, the digital experience for your customers, your members, and your employees. So I'd like to turn this over to Rich Briddock to talk about strategies to navigate that shifting legal and regulatory framework around personal data, and to do so in a way that doesn't lose the effectiveness of your digital marketing strategies. Rich, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I understand that talking about regulatory frameworks with marketers may make most of your eyes want to glaze over. So I'm going to try and do this in a way that is both somewhat educational and informative without losing half of the participants on this webinar before Aaron and Adam get to go. So at least I get to go before them, so you guys will stick around to hear that. But obviously, you know, for a lot of us healthcare marketers out there, a lot's happened in the last 12 months. It's hard to believe that in December 2022, less than a year ago, HHS issued a bulletin after a couple of class action lawsuits against health systems about the use of pixels and the data that those pixels were collecting and sending to non-HIPAA compliant entities such as Meta and Google Ads and Google Analytics. And since then, it feels like it's been a pretty wild ride, right? With something big happening every month or every couple of months, especially after the FTC got involved and started fining folks and putting out pretty hefty settlements for some of the big players that we see out there, big health platforms that were very sort of high profile and high visibility. A lot of you guys may have been on the end of conversations of, what are we going to do? We've got to remove all of our pixels. How are we going to utilize our marketing machine now? You may have even been on the end of a letter from HHS or from the FTC. And some of you out there may have even been the victim of a class action lawsuit around this stuff. So a lot of change and a lot of upheaval that's happened over the last 12 months. And I'm not going to walk you through all of this timeline because I think most of you are probably pretty aware, but essentially, given the amount of activity that we're seeing around this, the regulatory framework only feels like it's going one way, right? Which is that HHS, OCR, FTC are becoming more and more concerned about data that non-compliant entities are collecting, what they're doing with that data, and obviously taking further steps to protect the privacy of patients and making sure that, you know, we are all covered entities are adhering to HIPAA and the use of pixel technologies and the information that they're sending out to non-covered entities. What we've begun to see is a bit of a pushback against this with the AHA, Texas Hospital Association, pushing back and actually filing a suit against the HHS's ban on third-party web trackers. That happened just earlier this month. But who knows, where that suit will go. And to a lot of us in the industry, it sort of feels like the genie's already out of the bottle at this point, and that we're probably not going to go back to where we were before any of this happened. I think what's really crucial, though, about this timeline when we're thinking about HIPAA compliant marketing solutions and analytics solutions in particular, and that tends to go under the radar, is actually Google's response about Google Analytics when the HHS bulletin first came out. And essentially what Google did is they issued a written response to this bulletin, basically saying, yeah, Google Analytics is not HIPAA compliant. And we've never claimed it was HIPAA compliant. And we're not claiming that it's HIPAA compliant now. And essentially, if you use GA, or now it's GA4, of course, but then it was UA or GA4. If you use Google Analytics on authenticated pages, so where a patient is logging in, those are likely to be HIPAA covered. And if you're using them on unauthenticated pages that relate to the provision of healthcare services, those are also likely to be HIPAA covered, and you should not have our solution on those pages. So when you think about that definition, either a logged in page where a patient goes or a non-logged in page that talks about the provision of healthcare services, that's pretty much covering off 100% of the pages that you have on your website, bar maybe the careers page. But other than that, everything else you just can't track. So that kind of makes Google Analytics pretty useless, right? If you can't see the activity that's happening on the majority of your pages, and particularly all of the pages that drive patient acquisition, that really puts you in a bind. So the good news is we don't have to wait on the AHA to, win its case against HHS and FTC. There are solutions out there now to not only regain any potential tracking that you may have lost when Google Analytics was sort of struck from the record, as it were, but to actually grow in your analytics maturity by creating a MarTech stack that is both HIPAA compliant, but actually is more powerful than some of the tools that you may have been using before in terms of GA4 or Google Analytics. And so obviously there's kind of three main components to this that we see. Would love to obviously get Aaron and Adam's thoughts on that when they talk later about some of the other components as well. But the way that we see it is, first, you want to have a HIPAA compliant analytics solution. So that is a analytics solution that will sign a BAA with you, where you know exactly what's happening to your data, what's not happening to your data, how it's being secured, how it's being protected, etc. Where that opens up a world of opportunity, right? Because once you have that analytics solution that is BAA protected, you now have a hub to not only collect data from the website, but also to port in data from other sources, right? So perhaps you have offline sources, perhaps you have information from an EHR, a PMS, a CRM that you want to marry together with your web activity. Now, all of a sudden, you can do that, right? In a way that is less restrictive than you could with GA4. You could send offline data into GA4, but you have to be very careful about PII and anything that might identify a user inside of GA4, again, because you were sending it to a non-covered entity that you didn't have a BAA with. So that is definitely the focal point. This is something that you absolutely should do, is get a HIPAA compliant analytics solution. Heap is a great option. I'm probably not contractually obliged to say that there are other options on the market, but Heap is a fantastic one. And then, other options are things like a customer data platform. So I'm sure people in analytics have heard the term CDP thrown around. There are specialist customer data platforms, in particular one called FreshPaint, that is out in the wild right now, whose core focus is to help you make downstream, is to capture activity on the website and then send it to downstream destinations like Facebook ads, like Google Analytics, like Google Ads in a HIPAA compliant way. Also, like a CDP, like any other CDP, you can send it to a whole bunch of different destinations. It streamlines your tracking and your data pipeline. But more importantly, some of these solutions basically create a data governance layer between what you're sending to those downstream destinations and what you're collecting up front. And so again, for bigger healthcare systems, this might be something that you want to consider in addition to a HIPAA compliant analytics solution. And we do work with a number of clients on our end that have deployed both, that work in harmony with each other. And then the third piece of the puzzle is utilizing a HIPAA compliant offline conversion tracking solution. And so I know that Adam uses Invoker for call tracking at MSK. They will sign a BAA with you. There are plenty of other call tracking solutions out there that will also sign BAAs that are HIPAA compliant. And there are offline call tracking solutions now that are starting to branch out into not just call tracking, but also form and lead tracking, where you can start to pipe conversions, like even form conversions, web conversions, back into your systems as an offline conversion where you're no longer reliant on the pixel. So you would not be reliant on a Meta pixel, you would not be reliant on a Google Ads pixel. And obviously the benefit of this is you can use that system to capture the data, similar to how you would potentially use Heap to capture that front-end data. And then you can send it to a downstream destination in a HIPAA compliant way as an offline conversion. There are other benefits to deploying offline conversion tracking solutions as well that we'll also get into later on in this deck that will give you more information and richer insights for your patient acquisition solution. I do want to briefly touch on, I've been told to keep the Heap propaganda to a minimum, but I do want to briefly touch on this great story of how Heap kind of saved the day for us with a shared client. We work with a large platform in the behavioral health space whose product team was leveraging Heap to try and more effectively understand their online booking flow, but the marketing team was not leveraging Heap. And then when the bulletin came out and there was a lot of visibility in the behavioral health space with the BetterHelp settlement, they had to pretty urgently turn off all of their pixel tracking. So the Meta pixel that they were leveraging, Google Ads pixels, the Google Analytics pixels, and we had a pretty sophisticated patient acquisition machine that we built for them over years. And all of a sudden, we just had the rug completely pulled out from underneath us. And so, of course, it's Friday afternoon, it's 4 o'clock, everyone's kind of scrambling, getting together, like what on earth are we going to do to, try and make sure this whole thing doesn't unravel? And so what we did is someone basically mentioned that there was Heap on the product side. What we did was we just got Heap all across the website on every page. And Heap has this amazing auto capture function where essentially every event that's happening on across the web is automatically captured by Heap without you having to set anything up out of the box like you do with Google Analytics. And then you can go in and define what those events are and say, oh yeah, that event is a conversion. I want to label it as this so I know what it is. So essentially within like 20 minutes, we got Heap across the entire website. It started capturing all of the events that we needed to track as a marketing team. We were able to then go in on Monday, define what those events were. And by, the end of the week, we were having those events that were being captured by Heap in a HIPAA compliant way, being passed back to Google Ads as an offline conversion through Heap Connect, which is a solution that ties into Google BigQuery that's also protected by a BAA, back into the advertising platforms so that we could continue to optimize against them. And instead of losing pixel tracking and having all that momentum pulled out from under us and seeing a huge decline in our patient acquisition, we actually lost almost no data. And we were able to very quickly get the right data back into our advertising platforms, but in a HIPAA compliant way without barely skipping a beat. So a big shout out to Heap and its ability to be quickly stood up and capture all the things that we need as marketers to do our jobs in an effective way. So I think the big question too is the way that I've had a lot of these conversations over the last 12 months, and inevitably it's kind of seen as a pain, as a sunk cost, right? Like, oh, I had these tools that were working for me before, and now in order to be compliant, I have to switch to something new. And this just feels like, a pain. But I try and encourage people to look at it as an opportunity, right? And as I mentioned before, going from something like Google Analytics to Heap, it is a definite upgrade, right? And so we should look at how we can get more from the technology that we're standing up, as opposed to just replicating what we had before. And so going back to that same client example, one of the things that we started to do now that we have a BA protected analytics solution is to start to say, okay, great, we've got this awesome solution in Heap. What other things can we track about our patients that they're doing, right? So that we can send better signals in a HIPAA compliant way back to our advertising platforms, right? And so before, we may have had one conversion that was, did they book an appointment, right? We're starting to get to a point now where we're looking at the insurer that they're selecting, the appointment type that they're selecting, potentially the condition that they have, the provider that they're going with, the service line that they're utilizing. And with all this additional data, we can start to build an ROI model, right? Where we're actually saying, okay, this patient has Aetna, and I know that Aetna actually reimburses at a higher rate than Anthem. So this patient is actually worth 20% more than my average patient, or by my patient that takes Anthem. And so then we can start to send those dynamic values back based on these additional criteria that we're capturing, which, as you guys can imagine, when we're thinking about like a value-based bidding model and a return on investment, this really not only helps us to know that we are acquiring patients, but it helps us to optimize towards acquiring the right patients, the patients that are really going to drive the business forward, and grow the bottom line, and which is obviously incredibly important from a patient acquisition model. So again, I just reiterate, don't look at this as only a nightmarish challenge that you have to solve, but an opportunity to reevaluate your conversion strategy, your measurement strategy, and dive into what improvements can be made now that you have this new MarTech at your disposal. The other thing that I really want to push on you guys, because we've seen this a lot as well over the last 12 months, is this is a great opportunity to really dive into your offline tracking components, your offline tracking MarTech, and make sure that you're getting the most out of it. So their call tracking has existed for a long, long time now. I'm sure most of you use call tracking in some guise, but more recently, what we've seen is more AI-based and human listening call tracking solutions. And so I know Invoker, that's used by MSK, have a great AI solution for understanding the dispositions of calls. There's also things like tracking what buttons a user clicks in terms of what departments they want to get routed to, and you can use those signals for better optimization. But there's also wholly like AI focused solutions that can not only tell you the disposition of the call, so whether it was a new patient that booked an appointment, or if maybe your workflow is someone calls in, they're a lead, and then they go to a verification of benefits stage in the patient journey. It can track all of those things, and then you can start optimizing towards these deeper signals, right? So you're no longer optimizing towards phone calls, but you're optimizing towards scheduled appointments or verification of benefits or consultation calls, really deep signals that allow you to make better decisions. What these platforms also have is because they're listening to every call and they're analyzing every call, they'll tell you the reasons why a call is not booked. So things like if your marketing is collecting a lot of people who have Medicaid, but you don't accept Medicaid, or they're getting information for someone else, or they're procrastinating, or you can't see them because there's a scheduling issue. these solutions will give you insight on all of that. And again, if you think about pushing that data back into an analytics hub that can accept that kind of offline data, now you can start to see how you can really create some very rich data sets that you can do some great analysis on. And then I know Adam is also going to chat about the full funnel, but I think one of the other things that has become crucial this year is measuring across the funnel and really understanding in a HIPAA compliant way what activity at the top of the funnel and the middle of the funnel are driving at the bottom of the funnel, right? And so a lot of times there'll be challenges with this, because if you're running a video program or a paid social video program, or if you're running, even display or native advertising, a lot of the time the attribution will be view through and not click through. And so how do you marry those two systems together, right? Because by default, an analytics hub will only capture click-through activity, right? So when somebody has been to the website, that's when it's going to capture that activity. There are ways, though, to tie it together. So I think, one of the things that will probably come up in the conversation between Adam and Aaron is the use of distinct IDs to tie offline conversions back to a specific session that is being tracked. You can do the same thing with view-through conversions as well. So you can essentially pull out that unique ID and actually enrich the URL of your thank you page with that unique ID, so that then the DSP, where you're serving this upper funnel creative, will be able to capture that unique ID, and you can actually tie everything back together. So I bring this up to say full funnel advertising, so advertising from top of the funnel, making people aware of the category, all the way to the bottom of the funnel, where we're sort of answering the question of why now, why my brand, is only going to grow in terms of marketing as you get more and more digital marketers coming into the space and competing at the bottom of the funnel. So your ability as marketers to be sophisticated in your optimization of those top of the funnel dollars, and to tie them back to the bottom of the funnel patient acquisition, is going to become more and more important as the years go by. And so thinking about, how do I tie this data together in a HIPAA compliant way today can help you make fantastic investment decisions in 2024 and beyond. All right, that was a very brief run through, and I'm actually amazed that I managed to do it with 2 minutes to spare, of HIPAA compliant marketing approaches in an ever-changing regulatory framework landscape. Those are long sentences that I care not to repeat. But the sort of summary here is, this is a change that has been hoisted upon us, but it is a change that has a lot of fantastic upside to it, and that will allow us to grow our MarTech stacks, to make them more sophisticated, to do even bigger and better things as analysts and marketers than we've been able to do before. So we should definitely look at it as an opportunity and not a challenge. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Aaron and Adam for their interview around data-driven marketing at MSK.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rich. And thank you to everybody who's been sending questions into the Q&A. When I was off camera, I had a chance to try to answer a couple of them. Rich, there's actually some in there that you might want to take a look at as well. But we'll continue on. And as I said, we'll save some time at the end to address a couple that have come through as well, because there are some excellent, thought-provoking questions in there. So, Adam, this is your chance to really help the group to understand what is happening at MSK. So I'll tee you up here. So your title is, you're the Senior Director for Marketing Measurement, Analytics, and Insights. Can you talk a little bit more about what that actually means, what your role is at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and specifically how you're using data to deliver on business goals?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you, Aaron, and hopefully answer some questions from folks in the chat. Rich, your presentation was informative even for me. So again, very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. Secondly, I know my title is a bit of a mouthful, so I'll try to break down exactly what it is that I do. So first and foremost, I focus on attempting to improve the experience for people who are interacting with the MSK brand. So by and large, in terms of the sheer number of people, that is predominantly going to be prospective patients and caregivers who are seeking care for themselves or a loved one, people who are interested in using MSK as a resource for fulfilling themselves intellectually, finding information that they might need, among a few other purposes. MSK does offer services in the realms of B2B and licensing, for instance, as well. But again, my focus is predominantly on the pre-patient experience, as we might call it. So attempting to make it easier for people to find the care that they need, hopefully at MSK, to give them the information they need to make an informed decision and to make the experience of pursuing that care as frictionless as possible. Now, what that entails beneath the surface is multiple. And I'm sure that many people listening can relate to this. There's an element of measurement strategy, attempting to tee up how we all should think about solving these problems, the individual stakeholders that we have within the marketing org, the work they're attempting to do, the tactics they deploy. There has to be not only a common thread that runs through all of that, having this shared mission and vision and values that we're trying to deliver on, but individually understanding what success looks like, how we ultimately measure that, and then how we tell stories around that. Supporting that is a solid data strategy. So working with our IT partners and other strategists in that realm to attempt to collect all of the data that we need once we've identified exactly what it is that we need to be able to do our jobs, and to set up the infrastructure that supports that. And then finally is what I would call enablement. So working with individual teams to actually dig in, to begin analyzing, starting to solve problems that face them, and also upholding this element of education. So right now, I'm part of a small team, and I'm sure, again, others on this call might be able to relate. We have to enable individuals to be able to navigate data and to extract insights that are meaningful and drive their part of the business forward without relying on specialists all the time. So whereas myself and my team are available as subject matter experts and to try to dig in and solve very particular problems, we also want to encourage people to be able to take up the mantle of their own work from a data perspective and to do an excellent job.
It's interesting. A couple of things you said there struck out to me. One of them being collecting the data, which we're talking about quite a bit here, but also given from the question from the chat is really also educating. Data can be scary sometimes. It can be scary for a number of reasons. I've seen in organizations where people are afraid they're going to get the wrong answer. But in healthcare, you also overlay that you might see something or have access to something that you legally should not have access to as well. You know, we're talking about how as teams, as organizations, either organizations through people like you, or people in your role, or the teams within those organizations where they need to make decisions, they're trying to capture and integrate behavioral data while ensuring HIPAA compliance. So I guess the question becomes, how can you do this without reducing the strategic value of those insights? I'm sure you have some ideas as about how you and your team approach this balance between capturing data and making decisions while making sure people are keeping data private and compliant.
Absolutely. So I'll say, I'm sure like many other organizations, once the bulletin came down from OCR in December, we moved to turn everything off. We had already turned off our third-party advertising pixels in the prior summer after there were some rumblings about class action lawsuits coming. And we made the decision to turn off Google Analytics, which we were using, and go completely dark while we evaluated a potential partner. And I mention this because I think that having that kind of blank slate was an advantage for us. Nobody wants to miss out on months of data. But for the first time in nearly a decade, when we had set up Google Analytics prior to my time at MSK, we were able to think strategically and deliberately about how we wanted to configure our solution. This isn't only from the web and mobile analytics side. We got to think about how all of the different pieces of our channel stack, our underlying technology stack, including the data component of that, fit together and how we wanted that machine to be able to run. And so in looking for a replacement for Google Analytics specifically, but in also evaluating partners in other spaces, whether they were going to be new or we were trying to update our relationship with certain partners. We took this approach in saying, what is the bare minimum that we need to succeed, and what stands in our way from a client privacy and compliance standpoint. And once we were able to check boxes at that level, we would build up in terms of the layers of complexity or functionality that we would look for in our solutions. So our approach right now, it was then and still is now, to put privacy and compliance first. I have visited the HHS website for OCR that has all of the identifiers for the HIPAA privacy rule in terms of what's covered. There are 18 different identifiers that we have to be mindful of not capturing. I couldn't recite them off the top of my head, but it is bookmarked, and I've viewed it a number of times, and that's been our kind of guiding principle in approaching building a privacy compliance solution, knowing that if we're not identifying people in a way that could lead to liability exposure, if we're not sharing data with any partners who aren't covered by a BAA, and there are no intermediaries that we have to worry about, then that gives us the confidence that we have a foundation from a data perspective to be able to build the solutions that we want. Rich also mentioned this during his presentation, but there has been, I think, this kind of moment where we've been able to seize governance for ourselves and think about, on top of that foundation of HIPAA compliant data, how we want to structure our taxonomy, how we want to really build data in a way that's not only comprehensive, but intuitive for people to use. Even dating back to the first Google Analytics implementations, there's been this kind of wide net that best practices dictated you would cast around how you capture data, just capture everything, how you label data, be as intricate or as detailed as possible. And now we've been able to really refine that, partially out of necessity, because again, we're trying to enable people who oftentimes aren't data driven inherently to use data to solve problems. But we also see it as a luxury to just improve the state of data in our marketing organization overall.
It's funny, I have these conversations pretty regularly, and it's only just occurred to me right now what an advantage it is to have to rip out everything. I actually went back to just when my own family had to shut everything down. You had to get rid of everything in 2020, and how it gives you an opportunity to rebuild with only the things that you need. So I really appreciate that. It can be terrifying when it's happening, when suddenly you've gone dark, but then you do have a chance to sort of build up from scratch. So I'm sure that, we're now well past from scratch, but maybe you can help to set the stage when you had to get rid of everything and you've now been building up, being cognizant of just what you need. All right, can you talk a little bit about what metrics you and your team are most focused on right now?
Absolutely. So we, from an owned channel perspective, we look at our conversion funnel for patients and caregivers, meaning people can come to our website, they can fill out a form, or they can call us. And those two environments, the web and the phone, are what we primarily focus on from an enablement perspective. We do have integration with our web analytics solution, Heap, and our phone tracking solution, Invoca, that allows us to share data between the two and really build a comprehensive view of that funnel across both of those channels in a single place without having to pipe it out just yet to offline BI, which I found to be a major advantage. But even preceding that kind of funnel, so to speak, there are considerations around content consumption. When people come to the site and they engage with us in a certain way that isn't immediately indicating intent, what is it that they're trying to do? If they're trying to gain information about a certain disease, or they're trying to learn about an educational program, we have definitions for content consumption that we value. Site traffic overall as a general health metric. And this might be a little bit old school, but brand metrics are becoming increasingly prevalent for us, in part because not unlike some other healthcare organizations or institutions, and like some, we exist in this realm where there is a tipping point before somebody has to really care about us. We can't create demand for cancer care when that demand doesn't exist. It's not the same as buying a pair of pants or making a decision from a retail perspective. So we almost view this as a dichotomy. We have people in the general population who don't yet have to be concerned about cancer, but we want to show them the importance of the work we're doing, highlighting the human side of the stories that we're able to tell, and to keep them engaged as best we can. And a lot of that happens outside of our own environment. So not on the website, not calling us, and brand metrics in terms of how we shift perceptions and in particular, and awareness as well, are critical to telling us, are we actually successful in growing our brand? So again, the brand metrics, site visitation, content consumption, and then when the time is right, the funnel, caring about conversion as well.
I'm going to ask you a further on question about this, because this idea of a tipping point is really interesting. And I don't think it's entirely unique to healthcare. I think that it occurs in a couple of other industries as well. But so my career pre-analytics was I was in banking. And I used to say nobody ever calls their bank because they want to. They call their bank when they have to. And when I think about what you were describing, this omni-channel view that you're bringing all that data into one place to take a look at it, how are you using these various data streams to identify what that tipping point looks like?
That's an excellent question. So within Heap, we're passing data from Invoke, our phone tracking solution, to Heap. So we can see when a call starts immediately in Heap, and it's sessionized, meaning that it can be tied to that individual user through a combination of Heap and Invoca's technology. So if you go to the MSK site and you browse around and then you call a phone number, we're able to see what page you were on when you called, what number you were calling. We have certain numbers for appointments, other for general information, and so forth. And so those two levers in particular allow us to build views of journeys, of funnels, in particular because people can click to our form experience from almost anywhere in the site. They can make a call to us from almost anywhere in our site. And not everybody follows this singular path wherein they come to the homepage and then they look around a little bit and then they go to our request an appointment module and fill out the form with 100% completion. There's a fragmentation to the experience, especially as people are looking for information across the site on locations, on doctors, on the diseases themselves. There's an element that we have to embrace to all of this, which is that when you're searching for cancer care, it's inherently going to be an emotional and self-guided journey. People aren't going to hand the reins over to just anybody to tell them where they should receive their care or how likely it is that they're going to live. People want to own that decision. And so, as I mentioned, in trying to create the best possible experience and reducing as much friction as possible for those individuals, that's really the core tenet that we uphold. So having the level of the line of sight into the different ways that they engage with us, whether it's on the phone or on the web, and the different winding paths that they can take, consolidating all of that into a simple view is critical to tell us, where can we improve the experience? What are the pain points or the points of friction that we should look to improve? Like you said, Aaron, nobody really wants to call their bank unless they have to. Nobody wants to look for cancer care unless they have to. It's not, comparatively speaking, the most pleasant experience. So we just want to make it as efficient and seamless as possible.
I love that. Thank you. I love that. I can see that you're very passionate about making sure that during their time of need, they have the best possible experience interacting with your organization. So thank you for that diversion. Let's talk a little bit more about, we'll sort of move back to how then you're going to communicate this out within the rest of your organization. So you are, sitting there on top of this gold mine of analytics. How do you work with other teams to develop that overarching marketing strategy? Are there particular metrics you're communicating to stakeholders and leadership to trade for buy-in on the plans for what you want to do with this?
So in all sorts of organizations, I've worked agency side, brand side, vendor side, before coming to MSK across a number of different industries. I've found that there are two different ways that you can attempt to create buy-in and communicate insights and really, first and foremost, set the infrastructure that's needed in order to execute that. There's a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. Top-down being word comes from on high, what everybody needs to care about, and then the individual teams reconcile themselves under that. And then the bottom-up approach is wherein each individual team goes through the exercise of leading the charge on measurement strategy, data strategy, trying to understand what matters to them, and then fitting all of the pieces together to inform that kind of top-level vision. And because our marketing analytics team is, relatively speaking, in its infancy at Memorial Sloan Kettering, only a few years old, we have the I don't want to say the luxury of time, but we have the leash that we need in order to be deliberate and be thoughtful in how we're building up this infrastructure, building this culture, really. And so our approach has been the bottom-up approach, engaging individual stakeholders, leaders of teams, to say, what really matters to you? We have the institution level mission, vision, values that have been communicated to us. We understand generally, directionally, what our marketing is supposed to do, but what matters to you? And then helping those stakeholders to fit their tactics and the measurable outcomes for those tactics that we're able to identify to the broader goal of the institution or goals of the institution. So first and foremost, engaging those individual stakeholders, creating buy-in by creating interest and investment, because it's one thing to have a conversation with an individual stakeholder and say, marketing leadership says we need to do X. It's a totally different concept in terms of trying to build that culture to say, here is why your work matters. We want to help you prove out how it fits into the larger vision. It creates meaning, which I think is really important, especially at an institution like ours, where we're collectively trying to achieve something incredible, which is ending cancer for life. So that's really the first step. There is some connective tissue that has to be built once individual stakeholders are engaged. And so that's an exercise that we've gone through in the past year in an attempt to bring together this kind of holistic view, or I guess you could just say a centralized view of what matters to the organization, who's contributing to it. So that lays the foundation for the necessary conversations, deliverables that support those conversations, the regular cadence that we have for communication in general, for educational measures, and I'd say really greases the skids in terms of onboarding new ways of doing, new ways of thinking, and new technologies. Because if we have already rallied around what we care about, what matters to us, how our work contributes to the success of the overall organization, then it's a pretty easy litmus test to run against any new idea or any new technology to say, like, is this going to help me do my specific thing better? Because we already know that that specific thing is important to the organization.
It occurs to me that we've been talking around themes of trust, even with what you just said about, that bottom up and top down. And you're very fortunate to have a bit of I think you said that you have a bit of a longer leash to work on things. I do find that, and there are probably people on this call who are not in that same cultural place with their organizations yet. Typically, trust needs to be earned. Do you have any examples of campaigns or initiatives that were, inspired by user behavior that you're able to use to buy that trust, to trade for the leash that you now have to really create value within the organization?
Absolutely. I'd say the most prominent is our personalization program on the website. So we have a team that focuses on identifying opportunities to augment website content based on prior behaviors observed or other contextual factors. And what we've been able to do essentially is create a feedback loop between our web analytics tool, Heap, and our personalization tool, which is Acquia PE, and essentially feed data from Acquia PE that allows us to classify user behavior based on how they're engaging with those different elements. So something as simple as serving a modal window or a widget in the bottom right screen that prompts somebody to call us if they've navigated to certain pages that are more high intent pages. That's one example. Or based on a sequence of pages viewed, being able to change a call to action or the button placement on a page. Even these are a bit more tactical, but in keeping with that kind of bottom up theme, trying to do what we can, learning tactically, and then building some of the broader wins from that. More macro level insights have fallen out of that kind of pursuit. For instance, we were able to basically prove that a previously held conception about the role of some of our high intent content on the site, we were able to disprove what was previously thought about that content and how important that it was. And some of that comes through just having the ability to look at individual journeys and mass. So as tens, hundreds, thousands of people come through those journeys, you're able to see really the trends that inform the nature of it all. But a lot of it has also just been informed by the data itself, the taxonomy, the ease of being able to get in there and act with that quickly. So that's a small shout out to Heap that I'll give.
We only have about 9 minutes left. I had follow-up questions. I'm going to leave my questions aside because I'm not the most important person here. I actually want to start with one that was sent in relatively early concerning advertising HIPAA compliance internally, and just helping hospital employees who maybe aren't as familiar with data to know a lot of the know about the issues that we've been talking about here today. Adam, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that in business in general, there's a conflation of the complexity of ideas and the importance of ideas. And this is to say that HIPAA compliance is a very complex topic. Data, broadly speaking, is a very complex topic. But if you were to package that up and make it more approachable, almost at a 5th grade level, so that you can have meaningful top level conversations that everybody can understand and rally around, I think that changes the game. And that's something that we've attempted to do at MSK. So with HIPAA compliance, the bulletin that was pushed out by OCR last December, with data capture and how we're handling it and why it's important to different people who belong to different teams, trying to be not reductive in the sense that it's detrimental, but to simplify things as much as possible and have one-to-one or small group conversations. I think that helps to alleviate some of the fear around the complexity of it, the fear that the important details are being missed, but also plays to the desire that folks have, I think, to feel like they're being heard and seen. And if you're having a 100-person meeting trying to convey these very important ideas, it might not be as effective as talking to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people.
Thank you. There were actually 2 other questions, Adam, specifically for you. So, and Rich, if you have anything that you want to contribute to any of these, then please don't just take yourself off mute and I'll know. But a question from Mary Lourdes Burke. Adam, what are you using for brand metrics?
Excellent question. So we use a partner called Dynata for brand metrics. Dynata allows us to gather insights or responses across channels, both digital and offline, which has been very helpful for us. We want to try to create as homogeneous a picture as possible, but also be able to get down to the individual tactic level or even the individual creative level and say, if we have enough scale to be able to prove this out, what is the impact that this is having? We do have some challenges that we face there in terms of the walled gardens. So for instance, with Meta, we need to run an analogous study. So attempting to keep the questions the same, but running within the Meta platform. There are some brand metric providers that can get you behind those walled gardens, so to speak, and capture brand metrics, gather survey responses from them through different kind of workaround methodologies. Disco with a Q is one of those. But we chose to go with Dynata because of the depth of capability that they had across all other channels. So a combination of Dynata and the walled gardens is how we approach gathering those brand metrics.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a question for Rich. So Rich, I guess, what does this, I assume this means the legal framework, the regulatory framework. What does this mean for my remarketing campaigns? How can we re-engage patients in a compliant manner? And do alternative advertising platforms exist that allow us to retarget existing clients safely?
Yeah, this seems to be one of the stickiest areas as it pertains to compliance, and was a sticky area even before these changes to the regulatory framework that we've seen. I think, again, in terms of the black and white, HHS has been pretty clear about, Adam mentioned it, the sort of safe harbor method or the expert determination method in terms of making sure that you're compliant. I think that there are other considerations when it comes to remarketing around sort of the ethicalness, sorry, of some of these behaviors, right? So I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that MSK probably doesn't do any kind of remarketing, but because again, if you deem someone has cancer, is it ethical to advertise to them and try and remarket them and get them back to your page? This changes if someone's looking for a dental appointment, right? Or if someone is looking for something that is in a non-sensitive healthcare category. And so the technical answer is yes, there are ways that you can remarket in a HIPAA compliant way. I think someone had mentioned in a Q&A fresh paint earlier, and I actually mentioned fresh paint in my discussion. They allow you to remarket in a HIPAA compliant way by sending sort of redacted offline audiences back to Meta and back to other advertising platforms. I think you've got to ask yourself, depending on the kind of healthcare you're in, is it ethical to do so? I think if it's more of I'm buying a pair of pants, as Adam said, consumer type driven decision, like going to the dentist, then yes, it's probably absolutely acceptable to do so. If it's an emotional decision that is a lot more high consideration and sensitive, then you should probably steer well clear of that. So technically, yes, but I think I would look at it on a case-by-case basis, depending on the type of healthcare you're in.
Great. Rich, thank you so much. Daniel, actually, I should also say, Adam, thank you as well for everything today. This has been an excellent conversation for me. So I'll turn it back over to Daniel.
Thank you so much. With that, we've come to the end of our time. I'm sure the audience joins me in thanking Adam, Richard, and Aaron for sharing their expertise with us today. Thanks also to our audience for carving out time to join us for this important conversation. Please note that if you've asked a question that we weren't able to get to, we'll do our best to get a response to you. We'll also be sending out a link to the webinar recording in the next couple of days, so be on the lookout for that. Finally, be sure to give us your feedback by completing the evaluation survey as you exit the webinar. We look forward to seeing you at future webinars, as well as the Healthcare Marketing and Physician Strategy Summit, April 17th to 19th, 2024 in Las Vegas. Check the forum website, www.healthcarestrategy.com, for details. That concludes today's program. Thank you and have a great day.